Winston had said a comment to me, "Mom, you didn't raise me tough enough." And I was like, you shouldn't have to be tough to go to school. Yeah, I raised you to be like a gentle, kind soul. I didn't raise him tough. But I think it made him feel powerless. He just didn't know what to do when somebody hurts you.
I think it all started with like name calling, you know? And just like they'd shove me against the lockers, putting me in chokeholds. They were like threats, like watch your back.
And Winston was a shy kid. He had a very quiet demeanor, so he would just go into his shell.
They would mock everything I ever did. How I walked, how I ran, how I laugh, how I talk, how I cough. That was one of the biggest things that actually got to me. I started changing myself. I would talk differently in a deeper voice or something. I changed my laugh, changed how I walked. But no matter how many times I changed, I would just be mocked the same way. And I started thinking to myself, I am a flawed person. I obviously have something wrong with me. My motivation was in the ground. I am pretty sure every class that I was in, a teacher saw and heard something happen, and yet didn't respond at all.
They are physically touching him and mocking him in class, and the teacher's not doing anything. When they can get away with that in class, in front of the teacher, he reached a complete breaking point.
I didn't even know if the principal had been telling teachers about what had been happening.
Because he was saying there's no bullying happening and that was the stance the school was going to take, the teachers, the guidance counselor just fell into line behind the principal. And very, very quickly, Winston had no allies at school.
So it was the first time that I ever was like excluded. I didn't have any friends. I started like hiding in the washroom during recess because I didn't have fun at recess anymore. I wake up in the morning and I don't want to go to school, but I do.
And they also seemed to put all the responsibility on Winston to just ignore it. But the stress, right, of doing that, like of having to constantly put yourself in that situation where you know you're being attacked, but you have to go there to school and you have to put up with it, is really stressful. And I think it was building up inside of him.
That year weighed on me very much. Every day, before going to school, walking to school, it was weighing on me. They were already calling me the N-word at the very first time that they started bullying me. At this point, I feel like I'm invisible to everybody. Nobody cares, nobody sees me. But the biggest thing was I was putting myself down. There's no way all these teachers could say nothing's happening if I haven't done anything.
And the frustration at the people in authority who are supposed to be helping you.
I deserve to be called all these names. I deserve to be bullied.
Knowing it's happening, watching it happening.
And because they hadn't done anything about it,
but pretending it's not happening.
I thought there's something that I'm missing here and it's my fault.
It just became too much for him.
At that point was my breaking point.
Winston reached his breaking point.
English class, I'm listening to my teacher read, and one of them, I don't know who, reaches over their desk and pinches me on the neck. And I had so much built up stress from what had been happening to me all year. It just it exploded out of me. I had lost faith in myself, faith in everything around me, and I couldn't do it anymore. I started to cry, and as I was crying, it got worse and worse, and I started having trouble breathing. I felt like I forgot how to breathe for a second, and I was just trying to suck in air. This was the first time. I was terrified. And the kids beside me started to notice that I was hyperventilating, and they called out to the teacher. The teacher told all the students to get out of the classroom. At this point, I'm not focused on anything else. My mind is blank. I'm just hyperventilating. I'm scared. Like, I'm worried this never happened to me before. I'm drooling, snot's dripping from my nose. In my mind, I was dying at that time. Like, I didn't know what was happening to me. The principal is telling me to calm down, telling me that I'm making a disturbance. It wasn't soothing in my ears. It was not soothing. By the time that I had calmed myself down, there was a puddle of just liquids below me. I am hearing things, but I realized that these people, like, after all this time, they don't want to help me. Like, they don't care about me.
Winston was in the principal's office in the corner. He was quite quiet. He really didn't say anything.
And I started crying again. At this point, it wasn't a panic attack like before, but I was just crying because I was sad.
Because all year we'd been trying to tell him there's a big problem and Winston needs help, and he just seemed to refuse to acknowledge that Winston was being bullied.
I had been telling the principal that I was being bullied for months before this.
Clearly, from this incident, it had reached such a climax. I actually said to him, "You know this is because of the bullying, right?" And he didn't respond. My impression is that they didn't call an ambulance because they realized they were in trouble, and by calling an ambulance, it would seem like even more serious than they wanted it to be. The superintendent never got back to me. Like, why do you not care enough to get back to me?
I still had hope that school would be different now. And I went back to school on Monday and nothing changed. Now they had more things to call me. Crybaby.
You're a fucker, you're a dickwad, you're such an asshole.
Crazy, insane person.
And the worst thing about it was the teacher's not doing anything.
They think I'm weird.
And Winston said she knows it's happening, she's just ignoring it.
At this point, I'm completely alone.
It's clear that Winston's being bullied. It's clear the result of that.
And I build the courage to go tell the principal what had just happened to me. He brushes it off the same way he's done every single time. Not only brushed me off, but said, "What are you doing out of class? You have a period right now." I am so low that I had trouble dragging myself out of bed in the morning. I had even attempted Tuesday and I think even Wednesday, and I couldn't deal with it anymore, and I decided not to go back.
There were a number of letters that went back and forth between myself and the school board. The school board in each letter seemed almost demanding that I send Winston back to school. They wanted him to go back to school, but they weren't presenting me with solutions. They didn't seem concerned about making the environment safer for him. Winston doesn't feel safe at school, so I'm not gonna put him back in that environment until I'm sure he's safe there.
And they still didn't give a shit. They didn't care and didn't want to talk about what was actually happening. And they didn't want to admit that it was actually happening.
If I would have just sent him back with no solutions, for legal reasons, they probably would have been able to demonstrate that I wasn't as serious about thinking school wasn't safe for him. On the report card, there was a really ridiculous comment. They wanted to blame him for what had happened to him. And they also wanted to blame him for the fact that they weren't doing anything about it. I think they were mean. Not only did they lack empathy, in particular the principal was almost cruel. He almost became like another bully.
I struggled a bit in grade 10 and 11.
When I took Winston to see the therapist, they talked about how he had lost his laugh.
I was still scared to make bonds with other students because I was worried that they would turn their back on me.
His laugh was kind of part of his essence.
I was scared to basically make any kind of connection.
And so part of his essence was gone. Even before like babies can talk, the first communication you have with them is a laugh. It's a big bond between, like, for me, between Winston and I, the laughing. My heart sunk when I realized that he hadn't laughed for a year. And that became, for me, probably one of the most painful moments, to realize that he hadn't laughed for so long and that I hadn't noticed that he hadn't laughed. And then I thought, like, is it gonna come back? Like,
I struggled a lot to get back on my horse. I was skipping.
and will it, if it did come back, like, would it be the same?
I felt like I was alone. And it caused me to like have a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression.
Not laughing doesn't seem like a big deal, but for me, it was like absolutely heartbreaking.
It was a long recovery process. Like I was fighting battles to keep myself safe while I was actually in school. And then there was a whole nother internal mental recovery battle that I had to go through after. That is still, like I'm still slowly doing. Not gonna lie, there have been times where I've debated on taking my life because I felt there was nothing else to be done. I felt like the only way that I could be heard is if I killed myself.
They completely destroyed him. The first trial was 2014, the appeal was in 2015, and then there was a retrial in 2016. So they offered me $5,000 and we won't go after you for our legal costs. Okay, I'll accept that if the director for the school board gives Winston a letter of apology, and they wouldn't. Okay, so offer to settle's off the table, we're going to trial. The school staff ended up going in and like contradicting each other on the witness stand. It was clear that they were lying and that Winston was telling the truth.
I told my truth. I told the truth. which was my truth, which, as we know now, officially is the truth.
The principal, I saw him taking notes during one of the meetings that we had had with him. There were emails, and I've since discovered that they deleted all emails just before we went to trial. So that's why at trial they had no documentation. And the principal said he had no notes. He called the principal obtuse, rote, and inconsistent. At that point, I just completely broke down, and like my paralegal had to hold me. I was shaking. I was like, he got it.
I think that right now the school board is flawed. There's something wrong that they need to fix, that they need to change. Until they do that, I don't think an apology would mean anything from them.
The superintendent wasn't there for us. He was there for the school, and he was trying to protect everybody. The superintendent wasn't an advocate for Winston at all. Every time I would eat something, I'll just say I would vomit. Like I couldn't keep food down, which I think is one of the reasons when they finally offered that 5,000, like 5 years in, I was like, okay, maybe I should just take it. But I said like, no, without the letter of apology. The fact that the director of the school board, she wasn't willing to apologize to Winston was a last blow. And I think that got me angry enough that I was willing to go back for the second trial. And I'll have to admit that if I had known that it would take 5 years and $50,000, I probably wouldn't have gone down that road. But once I was on the road, I was seeing how, like, when we went to court, like Winston having his voice heard and being validated had such a positive impact on him that I actually thought it was a good thing. I had this inherent trust in school. School's supposed to be a good place. I was naive. If your kid doesn't want to go to school, don't make them go to school. Where they're being abused, harassed, assaulted, put down, diminished, where they're stomping out their spirit.
Me and my mom have always had a good, great bond. She's a single mom and I am a single child, so we've always been like super close. And that case and just like the entire incident kind of brought us a lot closer together.
A local restaurant owner in Ottawa contacted Winston online asking if he'd like to come in, and then offered him a job. That team of staff that he has there are just like, they're really sweet, and they kind of just almost like virtually like gave him a big hug.
My recovery process was finding a safe space full of people who care. They were terrible people, and you're gonna have terrible people in this world, and I realize that now. And I am disappointed that somehow our school system allows people like that to be working with children if they don't care about children.
So the old principal retired just after that school year, that principal that we'd be dealing with. Strangely enough, the school board rehired him on contract. As far as I know, he wasn't disciplined, he wasn't reprimanded, he wasn't called out on anything. They would bring him back into the system when they had a choice to just, maybe go with somebody else that might be a bit better.
After everything that I went through, there wasn't a single assembly where they got all students in the school together to talk about bullying. There was none of that. And I feel that that's wrong, especially if a student in your school has had a panic attack. You don't even decide to have an assembly to let other kids know that that's not allowed, and if you are also a victim of bullying, that you can stand up.
He had gone through a trauma at school, and he was anxious about going to school. And so there were days, a lot of days, when he would get up, shower, put his backpack on, and he'd get out the front door, but he'd get to the end of the walkway, turn around, and come back in the house. And there was even moments when he got to the front door of the school and then came home. There's a thing about going to school for him that's painful. And the funny thing is sometimes he'd come back home and he'd do all his schoolwork. So it's not that he minded doing the schoolwork, it was the concept of going in the doors of the school was traumatizing for him.